In life, there are moments you never imagine will change everything. A chance encounter, a stranger, and just one fateful night. This is exactly what happened to Cara. She had no idea that the kind man who gave her a ride that dark evening was none other than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the man whose name was known worldwide for his larger-than-life persona and incredible achievements in entertainment in business. But did Cara know that this conversation would lead her to an opportunity most people could only dream of? It all began when Cara, an aspiring entrepreneur struggling to make ends meet, was stranded on a deserted road, far from home and even farther from her dreams. The cold wind cut through her thin jacket as she looked around, hoping for a sign of life. That's when a black SUV pulled up beside her, and a friendly voice called out from the window, asking if she needed a ride. Cara, cautious but desperate, agreed, never suspecting who would be sitting beside her for the next few miles. As they drove through the dark, quiet streets, Cara and the man exchanged pleasantries. She learned he was in town for a business event, but it wasn't until the conversation veered toward dreams and ambitions that the man's presence began to feel more significant. Cara shared her struggles, how she wanted to start her own fitness brand, how she had worked tirelessly but always seemed to fall short. The man listened attentively, offering encouragement and insight, his words a mixture of wisdom and genuine care. Little did Cara know this was not just an ordinary conversation. The man, with his humble demeanor and kind eyes, was none other than Dwayne Johnson. He had recognized something in Cara, a spark, a passion for something bigger than herself. By the time the ride ended, Dwayne had given Cara his business card and promised to help her in any way he could, even if it was just offering advice or connecting her with the right people. Over the next few weeks, Cara's life began to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. Dwayne followed through on his word, making calls on her behalf, connecting her with potential investors, and even offering her mentorship. The opportunity she had dreamed of was now within her reach, all because of that one fateful night, a simple act of kindness that would forever alter her path. This story isn't just about Cara or Dwayne. It's a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one moment of kindness, one conversation, and one unexpected opportunity to change everything. You never know who you're talking to or what that seemingly small interaction could lead to. Life's most transformative moments often come when we least expect them, and in this case, Cara's dream was just one ride away from becoming a reality. Nearly a decade ago, Dwayne Johnson helped a woman in distress and drove her home, but it took 3 years before she realized who the man was that night. What if the most unexpected person comes to your rescue in the most unlikely place? Cara had just finished a late meeting, mentally exhausted, and was eager to head home, but as she drove down a lonely stretch of road, her car suddenly stalled. Alone, on a dark road, in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help, what would you do? The cold air quickly filled the cabin, and the silence outside was broken only by the occasional passing car, its headlights slicing through the dark before disappearing. Frantically, Cara tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. Was she stranded here forever? She reached for her phone, only to find there was no signal. Her battery was almost drained, and her isolation was becoming more overwhelming by the second. The vast emptiness around her made everything feel more terrifying. The road stretched out in both directions, but there was no sign of life, no indication that help was anywhere near. Then, just as her hope was dwindling, a set of headlights appeared in the distance. Was this a passerby or someone who might stop to help? The vehicle pulled up beside her, and a tall, strong figure emerged. His appearance was imposing, and in that moment Cara couldn't help but wonder. Was this a good Samaritan or a threat? The man's voice, however, was calm and reassuring. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. Clara hesitated, unsure whether to trust a stranger, but the sincerity in his voice made her feel safe, and without another word, he offered her a ride. The drive felt almost surreal. How could a stranger offer so much kindness in a world that often feels indifferent? As the man spoke to her in a friendly, easygoing manner, Clara's nerves began to ease. They talked about the trivial things, what brought her out so late, what was going on in the world. Nothing too serious, but enough to forget the fear she'd felt earlier. When they finally reached her destination, the man insisted on making sure she was inside before leaving. His truck disappeared into the night, and Clara was left feeling a strange sense of gratitude. Who was he? Why had he helped her? 3 years passed before Clara saw Dwayne Johnson's face on TV, and everything clicked. Could it really be him? The man who had rescued her, the one who had never once revealed his identity, was a Hollywood icon. She had no idea that the stranger who had offered a ride on that dark night was the very same Dwayne Johnson whose name she would soon recognize around the world. Her heart raced as she thought back to that night. How many people would have stopped? How many would have gone out of their way to help a stranger? The realization was shocking, not just because of his fame, but because Dwayne Johnson had been a true example of kindness when it was needed most. Suddenly, a sleek black car appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the heavy darkness that surrounded her. The sound of the engine gradually grew louder as it slowed down, approaching with purpose. The car, polished and well-maintained, seemed out of place in the otherwise desolate, empty stretch of road. It slowed to a crawl before coming to a complete stop just beside Clara. She stood frozen for a moment, her breath visible in the chilly night air, before she heard the soft whir of the window rolling down. A man's face appeared in the open window, his features softly illuminated by the car's interior light. He looked out at her with a calm, approachable demeanor, his smile warm and genuine. He was dressed in a dark jacket, with a simple shirt underneath, his short hair neatly combed. There was an air of quiet confidence about him, but he seemed neither intimidating nor overly eager. His eyes were kind, and his voice was unexpectedly soothing. "Do you need help?" he asked, his tone relaxed and unhurried. It wasn't a question of obligation or expectation, but one of genuine concern, as though offering assistance was a natural instinct for him. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she stood there in the cold. The night had already felt unnervingly silent, with the occasional rustle of wind the only sound, besides her own heartbeat. She had been stranded for what felt like hours, her phone completely dead, and no sign of life in sight. The cold seemed to creep deeper into her bones, and the darkness around her felt almost oppressive. The man's offer was a lifeline, but a strange hesitance lingered within her. Clara studied him for a moment, her mind racing. He looked to be in his early 40s, a man of average build, with a look of someone who didn't need to be noticed to be respected. There was something about him, something reassuring in the way he looked at her, the absence of any urgency or pressure in his voice, that made her feel like he wasn't just another stranger. Yet despite his calm presence, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of anxiety. She had been raised to be cautious, to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her this could go either way. But then reality set in. The cold had become unbearable. Her fingers ached from the chill, and the road around her felt more and more isolating. There were no other cars passing, no houses or lights in sight. She had no other options, and the thought of standing in the freezing dark for even a moment longer was unbearable. With a deep breath, Clara weighed her options. She wasn't a reckless person, but the opportunity in front of her felt like the only way out. She glanced at the man again, noting the warmth in his smile and the absence of any sign of threat. Something about him, maybe his calmness or the way he had approached her without any expectation, made her believe he genuinely wanted to help. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice slightly shaky. She hesitated just a moment longer before she opened the passenger door and slid into the seat. The interior of the car was warmer than she had anticipated, the seats plush and comfortable, offering a stark contrast to the cold air outside. As the door clicked shut behind her, Cara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The man smiled again as he shifted the car into gear, the engine humming quietly as the vehicle moved forward. The sound of tires on the road filled the silence between them, a rhythmic noise that somehow calmed her. Cara looked out the window for a moment, her gaze drifting across the dark landscape, wondering if she had made the right choice. She felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The warmth of the car and the quiet presence of the man beside her were comforting, yet a small part of her remained on edge. The man didn't seem to mind the silence. He kept his focus on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, and there was something about the way he drove, calmly, confidently, that put Cara at ease. She glanced at him again, studying his profile as he drove. He didn't seem to be in a hurry, not rushing to get anywhere or pressing her for conversation. It was as though he was simply offering a ride of kindness for him. Cara's mind started to wander, but she quickly pushed the thoughts aside. There was no reason to be anxious anymore. The man wasn't doing anything to make her uncomfortable. In fact, he had already given her a sense of security without saying much at all. "So, where are you headed?" The man's voice broke through her thoughts, soft and nonchalant, as if he had simply decided it was time to speak. His question wasn't intrusive, but it felt like an invitation to connect, a way to ease the tension that lingered. Cara hesitated, then answered, "Just trying to get back home. I've had a rough night." She shifted in her seat, feeling the exhaustion from her long day settle in. The man nodded, his eyes never leaving the road. "I understand. Sometimes life has a way of throwing unexpected things our way, but it always works out in the end." His voice works out in the end. His voice was warm, but there was something in his words that felt oddly personal, as though he too had experienced his share of unexpected moments. Cara found herself nodding, even though she wasn't sure what he meant. She was too tired to think about it too much, but as the minutes passed, her initial anxiety began to ebb away, replaced by a sense of cautious trust. In the quiet of the car, Cara realized that she wasn't just getting a ride home. She was also being given something far more valuable, a brief, unexpected connection with a stranger who, for reasons she couldn't yet understand, had appeared at exactly the right moment. Little did Cara know, this seemingly simple encounter, a ride with a stranger in a black car on a cold night, would soon lead her to something far greater, an opportunity she could have never imagined. As the car began to move, Cara felt a slight wave of unease wash over her. She was sitting in the passenger seat of a complete stranger's vehicle, and though she tried to remain calm, her instincts whispered doubts. Should she have accepted this ride from someone she didn't know? The vast emptiness around them and the silence of the night made her feel vulnerable, but the driver, completely unaware of her inner turmoil, remained unfazed. His calm and relaxed attitude soon began to seep into Cara's own thoughts, gradually easing her anxiety. The man, dressed simply in a faded t-shirt and well-worn jeans, looked like any other average guy. His appearance was entirely unremarkable. Nothing about him screamed danger or mystery. His car was equally unexceptional, a typical rental car that could easily blend in with the rest of the traffic at an airport. Practical, functional, but nothing to remember. Cara found herself briefly assessing the vehicle, but there was nothing about it that felt out of place. It wasn't a luxurious sports car, nor a rusty, dilapidated vehicle. It was just a normal car, just like the many she had seen before. There was no reason to suspect anything unusual, yet her instincts still felt on edge. The man shifted gears smoothly as they cruised along the dark road. The atmosphere in the car was remarkably calm. The soft hum of the engine and the occasional faint rattle of the road under the tires were the only sounds that filled the space. Despite being a stranger to her, the driver's demeanor seemed trustworthy. There was nothing in his body language or tone that indicated anything untoward. It was as though they were two old friends, traveling together on a familiar route. Cara couldn't help but relax, her initial hesitations beginning to fade as she settled into the comfortable, reassuring silence of the car. To break the quiet, the man casually struck up a conversation. At first, it was light and easy. He asked about her evening, how her work had been, and the usual small talk that one might expect during an awkward ride with a stranger. His questions were polite, never prying into personal matters, yet his voice was warm, inviting. Cara found herself talking more than she had expected, her unease dissipating as the conversation flowed naturally. He didn't seem to rush or force anything. It was the kind of conversation that felt easy, as though it were just two people passing the time on a long drive. Gradually, the conversation shifted gears, and Cara found herself drawn into more interesting subjects. The man spoke thoughtfully about the future. He discussed technology, how rapidly it was evolving, and the possibilities it held for changing the world. He spoke of ideas that seemed bold, even visionary, as though he had already seen a future far ahead of where the present stood. His words were confident, and his passion was unmistakable. Cara couldn't help but be intrigued by the way he spoke. He wasn't just dreaming of a better future. He was outlining it as though it were already unfolding before them. His vision was captivating. How could anyone possess such clarity about something so far-reaching? His excitement was contagious, and Cara found herself hanging on his every word, feeling inspired by his belief that technology would revolutionize not just the world, but the very way people lived and interacted with one another. For a brief moment, Cara imagined what it would be like to live in a world where all his ideas came to fruition. A world where progress and innovation shaped the future in unimaginable ways. She started to feel that maybe this man wasn't just an ordinary driver, but someone who had glimpsed the possibilities of the future that most people couldn't even fathom. He seemed like a visionary, someone who thought beyond the present moment, beyond the limits of what was possible in the here and now. As she listened, Cara realized that this conversation had become more than just a distraction from the night's unsettling beginning. It had become a window into a different perspective, a chance to see the world through the eyes of someone who truly believed in the power of possibility. The car continued down the road, but the journey now felt less about the distance they were covering and more about the words being exchanged. The night no longer seemed as dark, and the road no longer felt as lonely. Cara, once lost in the uncertainty of her situation, now found herself carried away by the man's vision for the future, his words offering a sense of comfort that had once been elusive. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so hopeful about the world, and all it took was a simple ride with a stranger. Still, Cara thought he was just an intelligent man with unique views about the world. His calm demeanor and the way he spoke about things with such conviction made her think he was someone who had simply experienced life from a different perspective. She admired his clarity and depth of thought, especially when he discussed topics like space travel, electric cars, and artificial intelligence, concepts that seemed to belong in the realm of science fiction. He spoke with such enthusiasm, detailing futuristic innovations as though they were already in motion, and Cara found herself captivated by his words. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The things he spoke about, ideas so advanced, so far-reaching, sounded like they belonged to someone far beyond her grasp. She had always been interested in technology and the future, but hearing these topics discussed so casually and with such insight left her feeling both awestruck and slightly overwhelmed. She had phenomenally seen strange joys in the present moment, creatives and reality, and Cara found herself lost in the possibilities. "Are you a scientist or something? Or maybe an entrepreneur?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. The question had slipped out before she could stop it, driven by the desire to understand who this man truly was. Was he some kind of visionary? Someone who had the power to make these far-fetched ideas a reality? It didn't seem likely, but she couldn't help herself. She was fascinated by the way he talked, the depth of his knowledge, and the passion with which he described the future. The man chuckled lightly, his eyes flicking briefly toward her before returning to the road. There was something in his smile, a quiet confidence that suggested he was accustomed to such questions. Yet, instead of answering her directly, he brushed aside her inquiry with an almost imperceptible wave of his hand, as if the details of his identity were irrelevant in the grander scheme of their conversation. His expression remained calm and unbothered, as though he didn't feel the need to explain himself. "Maybe I am, or maybe I'm just someone who has been curious about the world," he replied, his tone light and unhurried. "But enough about me. Tell me more about you, Cara. The small things. What makes you tick in everyday life?" The way he shifted the conversation back to her caught her slightly off guard. For a moment, Cara wasn't sure how to respond. She had expected him to dive deeper into his own life, but instead he was asking about hers. He seemed more interested in the mundane details of her existence than the grand theories he had been sharing, and Cara found that both disarming and unexpected. She had been prepared to ask him more about his views on the future, to delve into the fascinating topics he had introduced. But now, she was the one on the receiving end of the questions. Cara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to share. She wasn't used to revealing the small, often insignificant details of her life to someone she had just met. But there was something about the man's presence, something calm and non-pressuring, that made her feel at ease. She decided to answer his question, offering up the simplest of details. "I guess I'm just like anyone else, really. I work, I try to enjoy the small moments, nothing extraordinary." Cara's voice trailed off as she spoke, her words lacking the confidence they usually held when discussing herself. She was used to the idea of people wanting to hear something grand about her life, but here, in this quiet car, it didn't feel necessary. It almost felt like the mundane things, the tiny snippets of daily life, were what mattered most in the moment. The man nodded as she spoke, his eyes never leaving the road. His attention was fully on her, listening intently to every word, as though the little things she shared were as important as the grand visions he had described earlier. His interest in the simple aspects of her life made Cara feel, for the first time that evening, that she was part of something greater than just the ordinary. There was a profound depth in his questions, a recognition that life was made up of more than just the big, flashy ideas. It was in the details, the quiet moments, that most people overlooked. Cara felt a shift in the conversation, a growing sense of curiosity about this man who was both distant and intimate at once. She hadn't expected their interaction to take such a turn, nor had she expected to be so captivated by someone who seemed to be both grounded and extraordinary in equal measure. Despite her initial hesitation and anxiety, she found herself more comfortable, even intrigued, by the direction the conversation was taking. She smiled faintly, realizing that she had, in some way, been wrong about him. This wasn't just an intelligent man with big ideas. This was someone who saw the world in ways she hadn't even considered. Someone who could blend the extraordinary with the everyday without making either seem insignificant. For a moment, Cara allowed herself to embrace the feeling of connection that had quietly developed between them, even if she couldn't yet fully understand the man beside her. And as the minutes passed, the car continued down the dark, quiet road, and Clara's thoughts wandered, contemplating the strange encounter that was quickly proving to be far more than just a ride home. Little did she know, this unexpected conversation would eventually lead her to a revelation that would change her life in ways she never could have predicted. When the car finally stopped in front of Clara's house, she exhaled a sigh of relief. The familiar sight of her driveway brought a sense of calm, as though the tension from the last few hours had dissolved in an instant. The night, which had begun with uncertainty and fear, was now ending in safety. She was home, thankfully, and the darkness that once felt so ominous now seemed less threatening. Turning to face her rescuer, Cara smiled and reached for the door handle, eager to put the unsettling experience behind her. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "It's rare for someone to help like this." Her words felt warm, and as she spoke, she realized how lucky she had been to cross paths with someone so kind. Dwayne smiled back, his expression soft and unassuming. He nodded slightly, as if to say that it was no big deal. "It's nothing," he replied, his voice calm and humble. It was as if helping her was just an ordinary act, not something that deserved any special recognition. Cara, still feeling grateful, opened the door to step out of the car. But before she could leave, Dwayne did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. Cara paused, looking at him curiously. There was no company logo or any other markings on the card, just a single name written neatly in black ink, Dwayne. Beneath the name was a carefully written email address. The simplicity of the card only added to the mystery, and Clara's brow furrowed in confusion. Why was he giving her this? "If you want to talk more about those ideas," he said, his voice warm and inviting, "feel free to contact me." He offered the card with a smile, his eyes twinkling with a sense of quiet confidence. There was no urgency in his tone, just a genuine offer for future conversation. He seemed unbothered by the fact that she was now standing outside the car, ready to leave. It was as if the encounter, for him, was just another moment in a routine day, one where he shared his thoughts with someone who had been interested enough to listen. Clara hesitated for a moment, looking down at the card in her hand. She felt a sense of curiosity, but also a lingering sense of puzzlement. Who was Dwayne, really? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. She briefly glanced at the car, which was now parked under the dim glow of the streetlight, but it looked no different than any other. He seemed so normal, yet something about him felt far from ordinary. Why was Dwayne, with ideas so grand, helping her on this dark road? The questions lingered, but Clara was tired, and the warmth of her home called to her. She stuffed the business card into her pocket, giving him a final smile. "Thanks again," she said, closing the door behind her. As she turned to walk toward her front door, she heard the car engine hum to life once more. She glanced back just in time to see Dwayne wave, his hand a simple gesture of farewell before the car slowly pulled away into the night. The headlights faded into the darkness, and within moments, the car was gone, leaving only the echo of its tires on the asphalt. Clara stood there for a moment, still absorbing the surreal nature of the night. She had no way of knowing that the person who had helped her, who had offered her kind words and left her with an email address, was not just any person. He was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a name she would come to recognize as one of the most influential figures in entertainment and business. At that time, he was still rising to prominence, but his legacy had already begun to take shape. Little did Clara know that brief encounter would become a turning point in both her life and the world around her. A simple ride home with Dwayne had unknowingly set the stage for the many great things to come. Clara walked steadily toward her front door, the strange encounter lingering in her mind. She couldn't help but smile to herself about the entire experience. It wasn't every day that a stranger gave you a ride late at night, speaking as if he had already mapped out the future. She thought of him as just another eccentric enthusiast, someone with many creative ideas, but lacking the means to bring them to life. She put the card in a drawer, thinking it was merely a beautiful moment from an odd evening in her life. Months passed, and Clara went on with her routine, busy with work, meeting up with friends, and getting lost in the small things of daily life. Memories of the encounter would occasionally cross her mind, but they always felt like a minor event you tell a few friends about and then let slip away. She never felt compelled to contact the man or use the email address he had given her. The card remained in the drawer, gradually becoming one of those things you forget about over time. From time to time, Clara came across news stories about a man named Dwayne Johnson. His success in the world of entertainment, his business ventures, and his involvement in many charitable causes. His face seemed familiar, but Clara never connected these stories to the man who had driven her that night. She continued to think of that evening as a peculiar memory, but nothing more. She had no reason to believe it was anything particularly significant. 3 years later, Clara was scrolling through her phone when a headline caught her eye. It was a video about Dwayne Johnson, the man she had heard mentioned so many times over the years. This time, the clip delved into his entrepreneurial ventures, his success in Hollywood, and his impact on the world. Clara decided to watch, curious to learn more about the man who seemed to be shaping the future of the entertainment industry. As the video played, a familiar face appeared on the screen. Although she couldn't immediately place it, something in her mind clicked like a bolt of lightning. Memories of that night 3 years ago flooded back. She recalled his words, the conversations about bold ideas and the future. A wave of disbelief washed over her. It suddenly hit her that the man in the video was the very person who had given her a ride that dark evening. Clara felt a mixture of astonishment and regret. How had she not recognized him? Why had she not kept the email he'd given her? What could have happened if she had stayed in touch with him? Clara felt a deep sense of respect for Dwayne Johnson. She realized that despite his fame, he had been humble and kind, helping a stranger stranded on the road. His generosity had left a lasting impression on her, and she knew that the lessons she had learned from that encounter had changed the way she viewed life, people, and herself. Clara's perspective shifted, and she started to wonder how she could make a difference in the world, just as Dwayne had. One day, Clara found the business card again while rifling through her old papers. She hadn't thrown it away, despite it seeming insignificant at the time. She felt a strange sensation spread through her as she held the card in her hand. After a brief search, she found his email address. She wondered why she had kept it, but now that card had become a precious memory. She sat down, took a deep breath, and typed a message. "Hello, Dwayne. I'm not sure if you remember me, But 3 years ago, you gave me a ride when my car broke down late at night. I just wanted to thank you again and tell you that I recently realized who you really are. Our conversation meant a lot to me, even though I didn't fully understand everything you were saying back then." She read the message over again and pressed send. To her surprise, by the end of the day, a brief but warm message from him came through. "Thank you for reaching out. Of course I'd love to meet up. Let's grab coffee sometime." Clara could hardly believe her eyes. Was this really the Dwayne Johnson she saw on headlines and magazine covers? And if so, did he really remember her? She felt an odd sense of excitement. The thought that a meeting with him might actually take place was both thrilling and surreal. Clara arrived at the coffee shop early, her heart racing. When Dwayne walked through the door, she recognized him immediately. Their eyes met, and the tension melted away. He extended his hand, smiling warmly. "Clara, I remember you," he said. They sat down, and Clara recounted the events of that night, the feeling of anxiety when her car broke down, and the unexpected kindness of the stranger who now sat before her. She couldn't believe how much had changed in just 3 to the power of years. As the conversation progressed, Dwayne shared his thoughts on the future, his vision for the world, and how important it was to combine business with kindness. He looked at Clara with genuine interest and asked, "Have you ever thought about getting involved in something bigger, something that could help others?" Clara listened intently as he explained a few of the initiatives he was working on, projects to help people in need, advance technology, and make a positive impact on the environment. He could see something in Clara that reminded him of his younger self, the curiosity, the drive, and the desire to make a difference. "I believe you have the potential to be a part of something important," Dwayne said. "Maybe we can work together."